Earlier this year, Portland General Electric's John Kochevar posed a challenge by asking, Google wants to work with PGE to place Nest programmable thermostats in homes served by PGE to help drive demand response during peak winter and summer days. What price incentive should PGE set for each thermostat? I have over a decade of experience working with over 40 electric and gas utilities as a business analytics consultant, in addition to my time as an employee at both PacifiCorp and Northwest Natural Gas. So at the time John posed this challenge, I had a pretty good idea how to respond, but that relied on having proved the approach recently with other utility clients of Corios, so I could reply with facts rather than opinions. That time has finally arrived. Let's summarize the objective of this presentation. What price should PGE set for Nest thermostats? In short, depends on where in the electric distribution system the benefits of the Nest thermostat will accrue as a demand response program, and how that relates back to where PGE needs demand response impacts to defer capital and operating expenses tied to electric grid management. If you then ask me, how would you approach tackling this challenge? I'd advise you that this is an avoided cost optimization task. Let's drill into that. In this avoided cost optimization challenge, both Google and PGE play important roles, but perhaps not quite the same way you might think. I believe in this scenario, PGE has the potential to have superior information and also to have the most to gain or lose. In that, PGE should be the price setter due to its information advantages, and Google and their shared customers should be the price taker. Google brings its ability to drive awareness of the Nest thermostat at a micro-targeting level given its advertising network, not to mention the manufacturing and delivery of the thermostat directly to the consumer. Similarly, through its connection with consumers, Google can drive adoption of the thermostat in the home once it's been delivered, monitoring of behavior change by way of thermostat settings at peak hours, and reinforcement of this desired behavior. That's fairly powerful, but compared to PGE's stake in the game, it's comparatively lower impact. In order to maximize the return on investment in the program, PGE needs to leverage the power of the information at its fingertips. First, PGE needs to be able to know the capital and operational expense impact of operating the grid in the field down to the individual circuits, where ongoing investment by PGE is substantial. Second, PGE needs to understand the costs of each option they have available for managing and expanding the grid's capacity to deliver power, through low-cost options like capacity transfers, demand response, and DER, and high-cost options like maintenance, upgrades, and capacity expansion projects. In order to optimize across those options, given their costs and trade-offs, PGE needs to be able to target down to the circuit level in order to match DR program investments like the Nest thermostat with a likely payoff on deferment of expensive options like grid upgrades and construction projects. How does a large utility start to drill down on this geospatial information problem so that this targeting could take place? You need to be able to compare capacity with current and projected demand at every circuit and adjust for important factors like weather, load growth, construction, zoning changes, distributed energy resources, and other DR programs. Some circuits will have slack capacity, some will be within reasonable tolerance, and others will have tight capacity. When you overlay demand growth on top of current capacity, you can start to identify where you need to take immediate attention. Corios has proven at Southern California Edison that this capability is not a dream, it's a reality. Our intellectual property brings repeatability and reduced project risk in helping virtually any electric utility to deliver 24-hour, 10-year projections from megawatt demand down to the level of every substation and circuit and compare that with capacity. This helps power planners to target the location and timing of grid expansion and upgrade projects, and it also helps planners to identify where slack capacity from one circuit might be transferred to a neighboring circuit with which it's interconnected, so that they can defer construction through simpler, less costly means. This transformation in electric grid planning and forecasting represents the next logical step forward from system level to planning at the next level down for regions and substations to planning for circuits and transformers. At the circuit level, you can finally see with decent resolution the local impact of weather, distributed energy resources, and demand response programs. Let's take a look at how that resolution and signal over noise takes shape at the circuit level. Over time, each circuit starts with a physical capacity, and since we're planning not to allow projected to demand to actually reach physical capacity, we infer an operational tolerance for the circuit's capacity that we'll plan for. on the peak days and hours of the summer and winter seasons, we can project the likely peak megawatt demand for that circuit. Let's assume, due to increasing electric utilization from electric vehicles and denser urban zoning, this trend in peak demand will increase over time. So far, so good. But of course, it's not that simple. There's going to be some expected volatility in the hours of the day, as well as unknowable but estimable volatility due to weather response, which drives actual peak demand up and down on the peak day and hour. So when the peak demand approaches the operating tolerance of the circuit, we'll plan for the completion of a circuit upgrade or expansion project so that the capacity will be safely larger than the expected demand once it's done. And we'll need to plan to start that project well in advance of when it needs to have been completed. But what happens if the load shape and weather volatility is much greater for this circuit compared to the average load shape? Now the point at which peak demand surpasses operating tolerance occurs much earlier. So we'll have to update our construction project start date to begin earlier as well. Well, at least we were taking all the relevant factors into account. Or did we? What about distributed energy resources such as photovoltaics or local storage? Depending on the magnitude and timing of DER impacts, this could help us defer construction and upgrades back out on the calendar. That's a lot to consider. Here's a screen Corios provides to power planners to represent precisely this sort of information task. This chart depicts the components of baseline and adjusted demand per hour for a specific circuit on the peak day coinciding with the 99th percentile weather day in 2028. The power planner selects the circuit of interest, the weather day type for the forecast horizon of interest, and you could immediately observe that the peak demand occurs between 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. for that circuit. When you adjust for photovoltaic impacts on peak demand, these adjust demand down from the morning through early afternoon, but the impact is not noticeable after 4 p.m. when you really need it. Nor will we expect other DER or demand response programs to help to trim peak power demand. So if this circuit and others like it drive peak demand for this part of the grid, and there's more we could do through DER and DR programs that aren't part of this planning scenario at those peak hours, it would be very fruitful to help defer capacity expansion on this circuit, and that drives up the avoided cost. So now let's look at how the price of a Nest thermostat becomes directly relevant to avoided cost optimization. Starting with one particular circuit that has tight capacity, we expect that peak demand will increase by 25 megawatts in the planning horizon. This direct cost to expand the circuit by adding more capacity will cost us 10 units. Now, this could represent hundreds of thousands of dollars if you need the example to be specific, but we're just making these numbers up to serve the example. Upgrades are slightly less expensive, but don't deliver the same expansion. There's an available capacity transfer from a neighboring circuit at no cost, but it will deliver only part of the peak demand if it were fully committed. DERs and demand response programs like the Nest will cost substantially less but make a relatively light impact on overall capacity growth. If we wanted to combine less expensive tactics such as some DR, some DER, and some capacity transfer, that could stave off a more expensive construction project. Another circuit across downtown Portland has a lower expected capacity growth of only 5 megawatts, but the relative costs and delivery of other options are basically on the same scale. A third circuit will also face a large capacity growth, but in this case, capacity transfers aren't going to be available because this circuit has no interconnects. So if we're doing construction, upgrade, and program planning for the complete set of circuits in downtown Portland that require significant load growth, we have to balance all these direct and avoided costs, delivery factors, capacity of available equipment and budget, timing, and the sequence of when certain projects need to start in order to deliver their payoff relative to when they're needed. Furthermore, we'll have to worry about the sequencing of projects to deal with the larger, more urgent issues sooner. We have to factor in that DER and DR capacity reductions might not be as reliable or high impact as an expansion project would be because they rely on customer behavior. And we have the option of making gradual incremental changes for some circuits rather than being forced to make a single large expansion all at once. This is how Corios executes for avoided cost optimization in the grid management context. To summarize, avoided cost optimization of the electric grid and the incorporation of DR and DER resources like the Nest thermostat take place over a 6-step process. Lay out the options for circuit-level grid management, project the likely demand by hour and scenario, determine the avoided costs of each option, match the needs for each circuit with the ideal options, prioritize and execute the best options, and periodically measure the actual performance of those options using field measurement so you can tune the grid management planning and cost estimation process. Obviously, there's detailed tasks for each of these steps. When you follow this approach, you'll end up with the ideal cost for a Nest thermostat, as well as the ideal cost and targeting for all of your construction upgrades, transfers, DER, and DR programs. Corios and Amazon Web Services have jointly designed the repeatable solution architecture for distributed demand forecasting and avoided cost optimization, and it looks like this. If you're an IT expert and you want to drill into this solution architecture in more detail, we'll be happy to walk it through with you. I encourage you to call me or email me to follow up on this approach and explore how this can work for your electric utility. Thank you.